The next morning, as all the other teams prepared for race day, I was in Tanner's garage getting to know a bit more about my car. Look at the size of this. That's not a standard air filter, obviously. None of that is standard. This isn't standard.
Morning.
Morning.
What are you doing here? The next morning, the song was perfected, but we still had 6 hours to go. So we had a discussion about how the time could be used productively.
You know, this train is like a big billboard. Or could be.
Really?
No, think it's going right through India, and there's no slogans on it at all on the outside. Right. And there's 1 billion people in India.
The next morning, the dual carriageway madness continued. Only now, we could actually see what was going to kill us.
Oh God, now look.
Holy moly! The next morning, we had to face the fact that our party had been a disaster. But it had been even worse than that for Hammond. The next morning, we woke up in Switzerland. Only this was taller and warmer and better in every way.
The next morning, as I was finishing off my mini repairs, it was clear that Jeremy hadn't had the best of nights.
My pillow was just a pillowcase soaked in glacial water and then filled with stones.
But the next morning, the real test began. A sweltering 800-mile road trip to New Orleans.
The next morning, we set out on our 80-mile journey to the concours competition.
The next morning, James and Richard checked out in the traditional fashion. Where have you two been?
Well, how did you get out?
I just used my credit card at the reception desk. I don't know why they all didn't do that.
Well, it wouldn't have made for a very good television series, would it?
Well, it wouldn't have kept it up for 28 episodes.
Yes.
Next week, Major Pat Reed denies having watched the movie that appeared on his bill.
I've had a brainwave.
Oh, God.
And so, the next morning, the people of Barbados were treated to the magnificent spectacle of a Land Rover gliding majestically on a bed of inner tubes across the Caribbean Sea.
Right, here we are in our final car, and it's a classic. It's a Series 1 Land Rover.
The next morning, as we were saddling up, Richard Hammond had a question.
Why have you put Nigel Mansell's head on my bonnet?
I thought you'd like it. You know, British racing driver, British car, thought it'd be appropriate.
It's a bold statement, isn't it?
So you got a famous Brummie in the car and on the front of the car.
What, those larders we've been overtaking endlessly since we got here, you're saying that my twin-turbocharged Aston Martin is no faster than them?
Not in the real world. I'll demonstrate it to you tomorrow.
Oh, God.
Right, May, what is your thinking?
Well, I've bought this Renault 9, it's the GTL. And I've flown Abby out to drive it. We're going to drive 50 miles to a place called the Garden of Paradise.
Why can't we just go where we're going?
Because I just said we're going to the Garden of Paradise.
Because we hadn't had any booze, we woke the next morning, looking 10 years younger.
So that's the main fuse. That comes off the battery, doesn't it?
Yes.
The next morning, we rose at 5 to finish the job.
There's technical stuff in there.
And then, having built 2 boots for all our provisions,
Nothing is to be wasted. Everything is to be taken.
our car was finally finished.
The next morning, after another sober and sleepless night, it became obvious that the lack of drink was having a strange effect on one of my colleagues.
What are you doing?
I've had an idea. It's raining, yeah? We need windscreen wipers. We don't have one on there. So I've thought of how to build one. Got all this rubber. Yep, sandwich that, 2 pieces of wood, big piece of wood over the back of it, bit of string round it. We can operate it as a windscreen wiper.
What's all that racket?
Well, somebody's kidnapped Richard Hammond and replaced him with this Richard Hammond lookalike who got up early, had an idea by himself and is executing it by himself, and it's a windscreen wiper.
And the next morning, we began our search for a crossing point.
But hang on, is that a gap coming up there?
Even if we could do 30 yards, look behind it. Look, we're going to turn around, try the other way.
The next morning, we were up at first light to attempt another escape.
James, that's his rock. This has a quiet start facility on it, but I don't know how it works.
The next morning, the peaceful stillness was shattered by the cry of a distressed animal.
Clarkson! Clarkson! Where's my roof?
The next morning, we picked up our clothes from the tailor's and hit the highway.
When I said I wanted the sort of thing the locals would wear to work, I was thinking more working in a shop or working on a building site, not working in an embassy.
The next morning, mercifully, the wind had died down, but it had taken its toll.
Oh dear. Oh look. So it's done the same in the games room?
Yeah, I brought the roof down onto the pool table, and the living room, and the cinema.
I promise you, Hammond, it was worse for
How
me.
can it be worse for you? The roof fell in on my library.
I promise you, it was worse for me.
What's worse than that? Oh yeah, that's worse.
At 3 o'clock the next morning, the man with the decibelometer was in place, and I was first to go. Despite the odd squeak from me, things were going well.
The next morning, we were all reunited in La Paz, the world's highest and worst capital city. But as we waited for our next instructions, the mood was frosty.
Are you ready?
No.
La Paz,
We
right?
still haven't actually forgiven you as such, you know that, don't you? It's not like we've all been all mates now and have forgotten that you abandoned us to die, just so you know.
I couldn't go back to the hotel, eat a pepper steak, have a beer, and go to bed feeling good about myself if I just left my
I had
mates
to go to
behind.
bed.
And then
I
wrote
had
to
to
my
go to
mates
bed.
the next morning that the pepper steak wasn't very good.
I thought you were dead.
As dawn broke, the peace and serenity of this beautiful Ugandan morning was shattered by the bellow of a wild animal.
Clarkson!
The next morning, we ventured onto this terrifying track to try and beat the Stig's 156.6.
God, this is quick.
The next morning, the weather had become extremely Welsh. But still, the golf was uncaught.
This isn't working, sir.
No, I agree. I think we're going to have to break out the Top Gear Police Department magnetron of justice.